Hi, my name is Chandra Cox. I'm the founder of Chandra Cox LLC, and I'm working with corporate teams to do team building and leadership training. And I'm also an equity partner and on the leadership team in an organization with other entrepreneurs called Zadasti, where we are mentoring women in business.
Cool. And I wanted to start out by asking you if you can describe for us the specific types of problems that you solve. You mentioned about working with corporate clients, I guess. Um, so the specific types of problems that you solve and who you consider to be your ideal customer.
So my ideal customer would be anyone who is looking for a team building experience that will actually help them improve communication on their team and break down barriers on their team, and also to provide something that's a little fun. I know sometimes team building can be a little like ick, and people are like, oh, here we go again. This is going to be horrible, team building. But providing experiences that are actually meaningful, so that way we can actually like cut through the ick of team building and make it an actual fun and enjoyable experience while providing massive value as far as improving all those skills that teams need to make collaboration better. And so I do work with corporate teams. My area that I love to work with the most is in the hospitality industry. I think that it's a huge place to work just because of the fact that we have there's so much turnover in the hospitality industry. And so building teams that believe in a mission and a vision of a company, and who actually want to work together and to be part of that team is really, really important. And so my ideal customer are people who just really, really want to build a solid foundation as far as their teams go. But I'm also working on providing leadership training as well.
What do you feel have been some of the most challenging parts of marketing your business, attracting those ideal customers?
I think that a lot of what I see, you mentioned earlier about cutting through the noise. There's just so much, we're inundated with so much information online all the time, whether it be Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn or anywhere. And I think that it's really important as you're working on your own marketing, especially as a newer entrepreneur, to be able to look at how can I provide value for my target market versus just how am I going to sell to you? Because obviously we're trying to sell, right? You don't have a company if you're not selling anything. You have to make an income, but you also want to make an impact. And so thinking about those people that you are trying to serve and how can you add value, even if they aren't one of your customers. Because I know personally, when I go to work with a coach or go into a program or something, it's always the people who have provided value for me that I buy from versus the people who are just selling to you. I'm sure so many people experience getting those like cold DMs of like, hey, I'm doing this thing. And I'm like, nope, I don't know you. And so being able to relate to people and have people get to know you a little bit too, I think is really important, because people buy from people and not products. And so you could have the same thing as someone else, but they're going to, let's say your two products or services are exactly the same. They're going to buy from the person then that they relate to and that they can connect with. And so keeping all that in mind and looking at like, I think a lot of people also, I know I did this in the beginning, really focused on the benefit or the features, like this is how we're going to get there versus this is how I can help you. These are the benefits. These are the outcomes. And I used to be a teacher. And so it's really interesting. I almost kind of look at marketing through a teacher standpoint now of when I was planning curriculum of like, here's the end goal. Here's what you're going to get tested on. Here's the project at the end. Here's what you're going to get out of this. How can we reverse engineer that to get you to that point? And so as opposed to just like telling about the process of how it's going to happen and looking at the value instead.
And can you share a little bit of like how different ways that you provide value? I mean, you just kind of touched on it with approaching it from a teacher's mindset, right? But are there any specific tactics you've used or ways that you've been creating value as a way to connect with potential customers that you can share with us?
Yeah. So one of the things I've been doing is just kind of looking at LinkedIn as a place to provide value for people. And so that they can, even if they aren't my customer, if they come to my page, I know a lot of people don't actually create original content on LinkedIn. And so it's a great place to be as far as like marketing is concerned. And so when you're creating original content, thinking of what would be helpful to my possible buyer and looking at how are ways that I can help them, whether it's actionable steps that they can take and sharing those, or sharing ideas for how to go about doing something, or just providing a little bit of like some inspiration, but not like those inspirational quotes you see on the wall, like actual real, like something that's thought provoking, and things that people can have conversations around. I like to use polls. People really like to engage in conversations about things that they care about, whether, talking about, like, for example, I posted a poll asking what is, I can't remember the exact wording. It was something about what's most important on a team. And it was like building trust, communication, all these things. And so it created this conversation around what do we value on teams and how does that help us as we think about that. And so value add content would be things that are thought provoking, things that are helpful, things that are actionable steps versus just here's what I'm doing.
Yeah, and it's something that I like how you said that, sparking a conversation too, because often a lot of content that's out there, it's a one-sided thing, which is, part of the equation, right? If you're posting, I do a lot of sliders or whatever, or even listening to a podcast, we're having a conversation, but the person listening, this is kind of like they're consuming it, quote unquote, right? It's not necessarily them part of the conversation, but ideally, you mentioned about, something thought provoking. There is some kind of interaction there, right? Even if it's somebody they're reading your post or they're watching a video with you, and it's getting them to actually have that conversation in their own mind about how this affects them, right? And the other thing too, that I wanted to mention is, content marketing has changed a lot in the last few years. I mean, this is all part of like what we consider content marketing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it started with how do you create value? And unfortunately, over the last few years, a lot of it has become how do you game the system? How do you beat the LinkedIn algorithm? How do you, rank highest on Google? Which isn't really the point of it. The point of it is how do you help somebody solve their problem so that they start to become more familiar with what you do and that you stand out. And, have you found that to be kind of a challenge as far as navigating that fine line between, having to kind of do the techniques to get it out there, but at the same time being true to yourself and your mission with this?
Yeah, so it is definitely a fine line in the fact that if you don't have an audience, you can't help anyone. So you do have to grow your audience, or grow your network or your contacts, or depending on what platform you're on. But it's also like, I think some people who do marketing look at it as a numbers game. Like, if I have a huge audience, then I'll be more likely to sell. I think it's more valuable to have an engaged community, even if it's smaller, but you still do have to have people in that community who are engaging with you. So it's a fine line to kind of walk. But I also feel that, even if you're starting smaller, as long as you're providing value, the community will come, because it's just more of a long game. It's a slower it's a slower way of doing it, which is fine, because I think it's going to provide more value and more trust and just everything in the long run, and create a better community in the long run, versus just looking at like how many likes do I have, or how many followers do I have, or things like that, which is fine. But if they're also not engaging with you, that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we've been talking about right now, as far as the content marketing and creating value, a lot of that is this inbound thing where LinkedIn or YouTube or whatever it is that people are kind of finding you. Do you use any kind of outbound approaches as well? Like, do you do direct outreach to potential companies and clients or anything like that?
I do a little bit. That's something I'm still working on. Like I said, I'm a newer entrepreneur just here in the last couple of years. And so still learning about everything, everything is a learning curve, trial and error. And I spend a lot of my week in consumption mode of listening to podcasts and reading books and, just learning everything. And I my approach is a little bit more it's not like the cold DMs, the cold sales, that kind of thing. It's more just that sparking relationships. And as people find me and interact with me, then I start conversations with them. So I don't have a huge outbound strategy right now. It's more inbound, focused on inbound at the moment. But definitely learning about all the things.
Yeah, it's nonstop learning, right? I mean, you
Mhm.
you and I were just before we hit record, I was mentioning that I'm doing a bit of a rebrand on this show itself right now, right? And
Mhm.
it's just like this is what I do for a living is the figuring out how do you target the messaging to be focused on the ideal customer. And it's you're always iterating because things evolve and things shift and I just think it's a good point to bring up for people listening. It's like you're not going to have everything figured out. And
Mhm.
as you figure out one part that works and you start to explore new things like for yourself, how do you build your direct outreach or your outbound? It is always a work in progress. So I think it's a good lesson for me to remember and for people listening to remember is that it's always it's an iterative process. So
Yeah. Especially if you're a newer entrepreneur and you don't have a whole team of people around you and you're not hiring people to do your marketing. And it's a lot. It's challenging. It's a lot to take in. And it's definitely a whole learning process, which has been really enjoyable. And I love it. But yeah, there's still a lot more to learn. And I'm also, doing different things as far as like in-person networking too versus just online. And so that's a whole different type of marketing of just meeting people and having conversations with people. And so yeah, it's been a really interesting journey of kind of figuring this out.
yeah, and obviously we all know that the in-person stuff was put on hold, obviously
Mm-hmm.
with COVID, and it's almost like now that that's an option again. It's for I don't know if you feel this way, but it's almost weird to get like, wait a minute, I could do something like an in-person event, or I could do a workshop with people in the room.
Yeah.
Like, how would that even work? You know? It's just so you just get so used to the online. And one of the nice things about the online, though, I mean, the last few years has been tough for everybody, some people more than others, but like it has opened up an opportunity for people like you and I are both in the Columbus, Ohio area. We can work with people. We were always able to work with people outside of our city, but in 2020, that really opened up, right? So have you felt that at all? It's like I don't know if you focus on like local companies to work with, or do you kind of go a little broader with your reach?
Yeah, so I do go broader with my reach. I absolutely love traveling for work, traveling for pleasure, all of the traveling. And so I think it's really interesting. We're in a spot now where we can do things in person. We can have, groups that we talk to online who are from all over the place. I'm involved in another organization called Zadasi. We're doing programs for women in business, and I'm a moderator for that in addition to being on the leadership team. And we hold all of our programs online so we could have women from California and Washington, D.C., and different places all in a group together, talking about their businesses and learning together. And so that's a really powerful thing to be able to bring people together in that way. I've also found that, doing networking in person, especially going to bigger events where people are coming from different places, has been really interesting because we haven't been able to do that in so long. And being able to actually like reach outside of our immediate sphere of, Columbus, Ohio, and being able to connect with people all over has been kind of amazing. But it's nice that we have the options to be able to, work in person locally, can work in person globally, can work online, and be able to accommodate different needs for both ourselves and our clients that we work with.
And it speaks to the importance of that flexibility that we were mentioning before about the always learning, always be willing to iterate, because even if your own business model and the work you do and the problems you solve stays the same way, the world changes, right? I mean, as we speak now, AI is the big topic, right? So it's like everything's going to constantly change, and we have to, whether it's the ability to work in person again, or 3 years ago, the lack of ability to work together in person, like all those things impact how we're going to reach people, and also how people consume information, right? So all those are just good things for people listening, myself as well, to keep in mind that you have to keep your ear to the ground and pay attention to what's happening. As we wrap up, I was wondering if you could share any tips for other founders on how to help them cut through the noise that we're talking about and attract their ideal customers.
Yeah, so I think that it's really interesting. Right when I first started jumping into entrepreneurship, I kept hearing people talk about personal branding and what's your personal brand. And it didn't make sense to me for a long time, to be honest. I was like, what do you mean? It's like, beyond your actual branding of like colors and logos and things like that, about like how people view you and having some consistency with that. And so everything I do, if you look at my website, if you look at my social media content, it tends to be more of like a less professional, not that it's not professional, but more of like a friendly and approachable and slightly playful tone. And there are people who resonate with that. And if they don't resonate with that, then they're probably not my people anyway. And so I'm like, if you work with me, you're going to have fun. We're going to joke, we're going to laugh, and it's going to be really great and meaningful. And we're going to do awesome things, but also it's going to be fun, and we're going to be playful, and, things like that. And so I think you have to not be afraid to show your personality, because that is a huge indicator of what someone's going to get when they work with you. If you are just, having the basic professional thing that like, it sounds like everybody else, then people don't know who you are. They don't know what they're going to get when they work with you and things like that. And so being able to lean into that a little bit and be able to let people see who you are and who they're going to be working with is really powerful, in the midst of that, adding value and figuring out your messaging. And also just, being consistent. Consistency is so important. I have definitely had times where I've been more consistent and less consistent. And whenever there's consistency, things are always just going and people are finding you. And then you take that little break and you're like, oh, everything just drops off. And so consistency is really, really key in a lot of things, as far as like outreach and community and people finding you and things like that. So those are my two biggest ones.